Welcome to After the Download, the podcast that explores how people really use apps and other digital platforms, and what that means for the businesses that own and build them. Hosted by RealityMind. On this podcast, we talk to product leaders, data scientists, editors, and journalists to uncover emerging trends, discuss best practices, and dive deep into the data behind everyday digital behavior that you need to win in today's competitive digital marketplace. And now, your host, RealityMind CEO, Chris Haveman.
When we first started brainstorming about ideal guests for this podcast, we had people like Josh Berrios in mind, tech industry thought leaders with a frontline view of the latest trends, as well as a strong, substantiated view on the present and future of the digital marketplace. Josh is the principal growth manager concentrating on global app partnerships for none other than Google. I'm thrilled we could make this happen. Josh and I spoke about what good customer acquisition looks like today, the impact of LLMs on product discovery, how brands can and need to leverage data, and why obsessing over product quality is so important for strengthening customer loyalty. I'm very pleased to bring you my discussion with Josh Berrios. So welcome everyone to another edition of After the Download. I'm delighted to be joined today by Josh Berrios from Google. Google is obviously an amazing digital advertising business. Josh is in the world of apps and helping people use Google services. So Josh, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Chris. Excited to be here. Just before we dive in, I want to clarify that the views and opinions that I share today are entirely my own and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Alphabet or Google. But I'll tell you a little bit about my role. I'm principal growth strategist on our apps team. So I get to partner with some of the largest growing app companies in North America. And I'm really their internal consultant. I've been able to really hang my hat mainly on working with subscription businesses, but I've had the opportunity to work with a variety of verticals and monetization models like ad monetization, as well as what we would call a transaction client, like a crypto business or a neobank. So I've had experience working across all of those types of app companies over the last 4.5 years. And prior to that, I actually started as a contractor for Waze ads when that still existed. So that was my first kind of entry into marketing as well as apps. And been doing this now for 6.5 years and super excited to share a little bit more. I'd say outside of the core role, just to know a little bit more about myself internally, I'm also doing and leading sales enablement for my team. So I've managed to kind of help restructure the way we do onboarding for our team, as well as been in the process of getting my coach certification. So have coached over 100 hours over the last year or so, and should be getting my certification at some point in the next 6 months or so.
That's great. Josh, you talked about partnerships. So maybe, I guess, for the first thing for our listeners is to try and understand a bit more around, what success looks like in these partnerships. So from your perspective, obviously, you've got success for Google, but you've got success for the client and the partnership. Can you just give us a bit more color, how you define success and what kind of goals you tend to have?
Right. Well, are we talking goals for my team and my success, or are we talking about the clients? Because,
well, to the extent you feel comfortable, tell us about both. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, listen, at the end of the day, I'm in a sales role. So I have revenue targets, I have product targets, things of that nature. But I think what's maybe even more relevant is talking about some of the goals of the client. And that really ranges. It ranges depending on who I'm speaking with. It ranges on really what type of company it is. It could be a startup. It could be a publicly traded company. I'd like to say that the shift of this kind of volume play of like trying to get a bunch of installs and tons of people to download the app is shifting drastically into a more value type play. And I'm sure we'll be talking about that quite a bit here on today's podcast.
Yeah, that makes sense. The podcast, is, as we said, is called After the Download. So I'm fascinated in this world of subscriptions. Obviously, when you think about you acquire a user, then you're trying to keep them subscribing. What kind of things are going on in the market generally, if you can generalize? So what sort of trends? Is the world of subscriptions in apps being disrupted in any way?
the biggest trend that we're seeing across all apps, not just particularly subscriptions, is downloads have stayed relatively stagnant year over year. While there's some small increase, the larger increase percentage-wise year over year is in revenue. So what that tells me is that users are being more selective in the apps that they choose, right? So shifting more to understanding the value of a user is becoming increasingly more important. So it's that shift to to a CAC to LTV type goal versus just looking at, a cost per trial or a cost per purchase. So trying to understand the differences of each type of user. No user is created equal. And if you're not sharing that with your Google or any of your other paid marketing channels, you're not really doing yourself a favor here.
Yeah. So if the focus is more on value rather than volume, does that in itself imply that in a lot of categories, the markets are reasonably saturated in terms of the number of users within a category that there are to go after? We're reaching a kind of a ceiling.
Yeah.
And so now it's a war of value between different competitors in the category.
Absolutely. And that brings into so many different types of things and into how do you really differentiate yourself. I think, given the topic that we're talking now, I think it's a lot about data maturity. Do app businesses truly understand their user base? Let's just quickly take a look at the subscription space for a second. There's a lot of subscription businesses that have a freemium type model where you can use the product in perpetuity without some of the additional solutions that a subscription might offer. How do those freemium users add value to your business? Do they create a community, like let's say a fitness app where you kind of record runs and you're creating new trails and different things for an app? What value does that add to your user base? Or if you're a subscriber, how can you tell that this particular subscriber, based on their user activity, that they are going to be more valuable to your business? Well, use the same kind of subscription example. If there's a fitness app and that user A is going to register and do the free trial, but within that 7 days does nothing, whereas user B goes in, creates a dietary plan, does 3 workouts, reaches out to speak to a fitness instructor. There's a very clear difference between these two types of users to the business. So understanding this is so critical, and sharing that signal with Google in particular is going to be essential to success.
Yeah, that makes sense. So in this world of loyalty and subscriptions and I guess disloyalty as well, one of the things that intrigues me is brands. Like how important, when you think about branding and how your clients think about their brands, what's going on there?
A lot has been going on in terms of brand. I mean, we talked about saturation, right? And we talked about the competitiveness of apps in across multiple categories. I have I'm fortunate enough to be working with some of the larger businesses. So I think what I'm noticing on those that have, more disposable revenue to spend on UA, they're now starting to invest more in branding and I'm not going to say less in performance marketing, but branding in YouTube is becoming more and more a part of how do we tell users who we are, how do we differentiate ourselves from our competitors, and how do we really just connect with users in this day and age. And YouTube being one of the biggest streaming platforms in the world, if not the biggest streaming platform in the world, it is a way for us to leverage for our clients an opportunity to connect with users in a way that actually what we're seeing now and what we have seen for other clients outside of the app space is how that actually helps the down funnel metrics. Because ultimately, trying to invest in a branding campaign in those particular campaigns aren't going to necessarily see an ROI there. But what you will see is maybe a decrease in your cost per acquisition or a higher ROAS based on those types of efforts in branding.
So you mentioned the word metrics there. So I guess if we think back over the last few years, the metrics that matter to your clients. And you've kind of touched on some of these points, but how is that evolving? What kind of metrics are front of mind now and you see into the future as being ever more important?
Yeah, it goes back to the type of business. I will say that, like startup versus publicly traded company, if shareholders are looking for volume and that's all that they're looking for, we can get volume, a dime a dozen, I think, on Google. But at the end of the day, the shift is definitely, once again, going from this cost per install, cost per action model to a ROAS type model. I think there are some clients that get this, and folks that I partner with that get it, and it filters really between both the finance department and the marketing department. But others still kind of struggle with some of the older bottlenecks and older mentality of cost per acquisition. And that is really just leads to more of an educational discussion about the value of a user, like using the same example we've had before. So once again, I think the folks that are doing it right already kind of understand that ROAS is really what's going to help grow their business the best, whereas others, more of an educational discussion, sometimes even with their finance department, of like, this is how we're really going to help show better investment for your efforts with Google.
So Josh, I guess you can't do a podcast in 2026 without talking about AI, right? Mm-hmm. So in your world, what are the things that are happening right now with AI that are, let's go with exciting or scary, both from a customer perspective and maybe from a kind of Google perspective? What's going on out there?
Yeah, I'll start with the customer perspective. I think AI has been just rebranded so much over the years. I mean, Google, among many other companies, have been doing AI for decades, right? We've just gotten better at it. So how AI is leveraged in particular for app companies at Google, our main product for all app companies is one that touches upon all of our networks. So 8 networks, all of them with 1 billion users each, and just leveraging assets that they give us, whether it's text, image, or video, to go ahead and meet users where they are. And just trusting the system. You put in the inputs of the country, what you're willing to pay, how much your daily budget is, and let us do the heavy lifting in going out and finding those users. So that is really at a high level, like what we've been doing for quite some time. That's always the backbone of that has always been AI. But the things that are changing now are a little bit more on what I'd like to think is the creative side. Creative is one of the biggest levers that you have in that particular type of campaign. And the quicker you can get to market with your seasonality or maybe current events, how can you really leverage and put out impactful videos, images, and text to meet users where they are across these networks? We're seeing that becoming much more relevant to our client base. I work with some clients that have very long processes in getting creative approved, and it makes it still pretty difficult to come to market. But you have others that are moving very quickly, right? Creating new groups and personas, and having videos and images that are going to, once again, speak to the different types of user base that one app might have. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes complete sense. And on the attribution side, is AI changing things there?
Dare I talk about the privacy stuff that iOS has put out over the last few years and how it's made everybody in my world go a bit crazy with trying to track attribution on iOS. I think probabilistic signals on iOS has now been what we're seeing has been adopted. Most scan being almost a thing of the past and being very restrictive in terms of how you might be able to recognize attribution. I think that's really where we're seeing most of the changes and how AI is being leveraged there. But Android, maybe not as much because of, the less limitations on that side, but iOS being so heavily impacted by these privacy changes Apple put out that it really has made not only my job a lot harder, but all of these app companies in trying to really be able to scale what is most likely their most valuable user and what brings in the most revenue for their business in iOS not having as much confidence in the way they go to market with their UA strategy has been an increasingly difficult thing. So trying to leverage whatever AI solutions that Google have as well as other companies is really trying to do your best to help kind of, cross all your T's and dot all your I's in terms of attribution.
So let's talk about good customers, and maybe this is kind of a bit facile, but what does good customer acquisition look like?
I'll say it from a standpoint first of somebody in my role. Like if you're partnering with somebody at Google or at any other organization, I think transparency is vital. I work with many different clients, some that, we're able to understand why things are going up or down in terms of investment. We have direct contact with their C-level suite and have ongoing meetings with them, QBRs with them. They're sharing their first-party data to help kind of drive their campaigns. And you sometimes come across other clients that are kind of the polar opposite. There's no visibility into C-level stakeholders, which becomes prohibitive, particularly because the goals of a CMO or a CFO typically are pretty different than your UA manager. The KPIs that they're held to are quite different than that of the C-level. And sometimes things get a little muddy between all the different levels in between. So for me, as somebody that helps manage some of these businesses and ensure that their investment is being held in high regard, it's important for me to help draw those ties across all the different levels of the organization and how each person is a part of the governance that I need to have of these particular types of businesses. Now, from a client perspective is, are you doing those things that I just mentioned, right? I think the most critical piece is data. At the end of the day, and not just with Google, I feel confident in saying this across any of the user acquisition channels that are out there. Your strategy is only as good as the data that you're sharing. It's as simple as that. So obviously, there's a lot of privacy first businesses out there that can't share it, and that's kind of their brand. So that's a little bit separate. But for those that have the data, share it, right? Yeah. Like I think what comes up in conversation quite often is that we have a strategy, and let's say, I don't know, we're bidding on a free trial or subscription, but you're assessing a campaign based on PLTV, or you're assessing a campaign based on particular user actions. And I just stop and I'm like, wait, but that's not what you're telling Google that you want. Like, let's get those signals into Google. Let's ensure that your strategy in user acquisition is aligned with the metrics that you're striving for. And that I think is the most critical piece on top of, kind of the governance part that I talked about.
And I guess that comes down to a certain extent to trust, right?
Yes.
What you're saying is the clients have to trust Google that if they're clear about what they know, what they can share, what they can't share, what they're trying to achieve, you can try and do the best possible job for the customer.
Yeah, I feel very confident in my organization's, way of going about using first-party data. I mean, a lot of this is already being ingested. Firebase is a software development kit that has been used by app developers for a very long time. That user data sits with Google. We have NDAs in place to make sure that things feel very safe and private. It's ultimately, you want to ensure from a customer standpoint, you want to ensure you're doing the right thing by your users, right? Ensuring that the legal language and things there are okay, that you're able to share that data and leverage it for user acquisition. But once again, if you are not able to share the data that is going to align with the goals that you meet, you're going to have a hard time trying to find those metrics do well if you're not doing that.
Yeah, I'm just wondering your thoughts on the impact of LLMs, Gemini, ChatGPT, and so on the journeys that consumers take towards purchase. Some people would take the view that it's a lot of hype, pretty overblown. Others would say, no, we're on the edge of a complete revolution. We're all going to have agents working for us. A lot of the choices are going to be made by AI agents.
Right.
What's your take? You're obviously in the heart of helping people
Right.
build businesses.
Yeah, I think my thought is that at least currently it's a generational tool, right? And I think there's certain generations and certain folks that are still using Google versus Gemini or ChatGPT or whatever it may be, whatever your choice of AI platform might be. But I do think that this is definitely a big shift. I mean, it would be, I think, a little naive to say that this isn't something that is definitely not only changing this world that we're talking about, but it's changing a lot of things across multiple industries and disrupting. I think for me, as somebody who's, a partner manager, it helps me in my day to day. And I'd imagine outside of the creative kind of components of this, I think those are probably the biggest ones that I've seen, like the Nano Banana VO3 from Google, helping clients iterate creative. I do think that this is going to be a shift, and it's only going to grow into something much larger than what it is today. Not exactly sure how quickly things will affect this, the app space or even the roles on either side of what we're discussing today. But things are changing very quickly, and it is a little bit scary and a little bit exciting all at the same time.
Yeah, that's why I asked the question, because I think, you have people who are AI evangelists and people who say, oh, there's a lot of overblown hype, a lot of uncertainty in financial markets. And so we're at this really interesting time where, in the end, it's going to be the interplay between what products are put in front of consumers and how they choose to react to them. But it feels like there'll be a lot of winners and losers. And I think we'd be confident Google's going to be a winner in the end because you have, I think, the tools in the box, right?
Right.
But,
yeah.
but there'll be some people that struggle.
Yes, I completely agree. I think there's definitely some businesses that have, tried to kind of jump the gun. I feel like thinking about how to leverage AI to help grow their business and investing in AI before really understanding how to use it. And I think that is going to be more hurtful than helpful. But if you're going about this in a very structured fashion and really understanding how it can be leveraged to grow certain aspects of the business, app or not, I think those are the folks that are probably doing it right rather than just trying to race to a finish line.
I'm fascinated. Can we dig a bit deeper on that? I'm not expecting you to name any client names, but the kind of rushing to use AI. Are you talking about, for example, features within their apps, or are you talking about
all of it? I'm talking about everything. Yeah,
they're sprinkling AI on everything a bit random.
Yeah, right. Like, I mean, let's just take a step back and say that, like, yes, to your point, it's very easy to leverage AI for certain features in an app, and I think that is becoming something that I see across the industry. But what about how they leverage it internally? Right? There are tons of different ways that you can help scale a business using AI, from, all the way from accounting to support to, list goes on and on and on, right? Yeah. So I think it's that aspect, or not just that, but it's all of those things. I think you want to make sure that there are definitely, I think folks that I've seen do it right are folks that have brought in like AI leadership to really help expand on how they do it, versus like, a boardroom sitting together and be like, okay, we need to get AI in here quickly.
Yeah, they don't really know what they mean, but they need more of it.
Right, exactly. And I'm sure all of us have read stories about this, across the news. But I've been fortunate enough to partner with some businesses that have used it incredibly well in their products and have marketed it in their user acquisition strategy to help capture some of the, obviously, the ongoing demand or ongoing, like, search volume of this category. So Sometimes, once again, it plays in their favor, and other times I think it hurts them more than helps them.
One final random question, which I think is out of sequence, Josh, so forgive me for this. This isn't a linear flow, but maybe we'll splice it back in. Who knows? Sure. I'm just thinking about the topic of, we talked about loyalty, and I want to come back to the idea of disloyalty. Like, do you think there's anything about the consumer generally which is making them more or less loyal? And I think maybe split that into two dimensions, because you could define loyalty as a pattern of behavior. So I stay predominantly using this one app versus that app, let's say. So you're loyal. The metric says you're loyal. But there's also stuff around, your state of mind. And, do I fly British Airways because I do, because Heathrow's my home airport? Or do I love British Airways because it's such a great carrier? These are different things, right?
Yeah.
In the general world of apps, do you see what's going on with disloyalty?
Yeah, I think, it goes... Actually, I'll say this. There was something I've been able to work with very small companies where I've been able to grow some really strong relationships with some co-founders, CEOs, CMOs. And there was a co-founder that I'm very close with for a small AI-driven company. And they told me that the most important thing of their business is investing in their product. Ensuring that their product is as strong as it possibly can be, and everything else falls into place.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is having the customer in mind, right? Being sure that the customer experience, that you're solving challenges of that particular customer, that is the number one. If you are doing that well, everything else should fall into place. So I'll say that when I think about disloyalty, is that if you're not doing that, somebody else in the space is. I think it's as simple as that. There's too much competition. There's too many tools to help grow much faster. So if you don't have a particular use case in mind and a solution that fits that use case, you're going to get left in the dust.
Yeah.
So focusing that is going to be so critical.
Yeah. Makes sense. I guess the competitor is, even if you have a subscription, at the end of the day, the competitor is only one click away.
Yeah.
And we live in this product-centric world. I agree.
Yeah.
Josh, it's a fascinating conversation. I'm probably wondering now, so I'll ask you, what question should I have asked you that I didn't? Is there anything that we should have talked about? I'm delighted to have you on the podcast, I want to make sure I use your time.
No, I really appreciate that. It's been a great conversation, and probably one of many that we'll have over the years ahead. But I will say, I'll end with this, and I think it's, we kind of talked about what companies maybe be doing right or doing wrong. I guess I'm going to leave the listeners with three particular things, if I can.
Please. Absolutely.
Yeah, so I think we talked about these in various different questions that you asked me, but I want to kind of just quickly summarize why I think these are the most important things for all of the different app developers and app leadership out there that are looking to drive user acquisition. It is data maturity, first and foremost. Ensure that you understand who your users are and what that value is to your business. And ensure that you're able to share those signals with Google or the many other different channels out there that you have at your disposal for user acquisition. Your strategy, your campaign structure is only as good as the data that you share. So that's the first one. The second one is really mastering iOS and that opportunity. Particularly in the US, there are more iOS devices than there are Android, and we know that iOS devices are 3 to 4 times more valuable, or I shouldn't say devices, but users are 3 or 4 times more valuable than that of an Android user. So don't make the mistake of looking at attribution saying, oh, this doesn't look right, and we don't really know how to measure. Like, lean into every single available solution where you can understand the attribution of your iOS investment. If you are not investing on iOS, let's say particularly with Google, you're doing yourself a disservice. You're losing out on tons of revenue if you haven't found a way to better measure and ensure that your investment, not only with Google or other networks, is growing your business. So don't leave iOS on the table because of what Apple did with iOS version 14 and all the different privacy features that they've provided for their users. And the very last one that I'll share is creative. We talked about how creative is one of the bigger levers, and particularly in an app campaign with Google. Really being able to leverage the AI solutions out there available to you, being able to really quickly iterate on those. But not only that, but how do you speak to our audience? Once again, 8 networks, 8 billion users each. That's a lot of opportunity. So I'll give one example. I was speaking with a particularly like an apartment rendering app recently. And I told them that they shared, obviously they have multiple different types of users. They have a contractor, they have a real estate agent, and they have a homeowner, among probably many others, right? If you're speaking to a contractor like a homeowner, or you're speaking to a real estate agent like a homeowner, that's not going to land very well, right? You want to have images and videos of that particular persona, meet users where they are, and we will find the best placement to serve those particular ads and reach each one of those different types of users. So investing in better creative that speaks to each of the types of users that you have is critical in today's age, and not only leveraging the AI that Google has, but the many other organizations out there. So that was my long-winded number 3, investing in creative.
No, that was great. So data maturity, mastering iOS, and creative.
Yep.
Any app developers, publishers, and so on out there, these are 3 topics that need to be all over. Awesome. Well, what a great way to end. Josh, thank you so much for your time and joining us on the podcast today. It's been fascinating hearing about your experiences and everything you're doing. So thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of After the Download. If you found today's insights valuable, subscribe to stay ahead of the curve at the intersection of technology, data, and consumer behavior. Please take a moment to share, rate, and review, helping us grow this exciting new thought leadership channel. And keep joining us as we connect you to world-class product and brand strategists, data experts, and key observers of the digital space. We also welcome your feedback. Feel free to send us your ideas and observations at atdownload@realitymind.com. That's @download@realitymind.com. Thanks, and see you next time.